Recently, there are many news reports about a significant decrease in China's export orders and the transfer of those orders to Southeast Asia, raising concerns about China's economic decline. Is it real? Is China really going down? While it is true that the low-end industrial chain has shifted to India and Vietnam in recent years, both of these countries have experienced strong economic growth. The development trend of the industry indicates that economic and industrial progress is a gradual process that does not happen overnight. Since the Second World War, only a handful of emerging economies, such as South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Israel, have transformed into advanced economies after 70 to 80 years of development. Meanwhile, there are about 150 developing economies in the world that face similar challenges. Even for relatively successful economies, it takes considerable time and effort to develop. For example, it took Japan 26 years to increase its GDP per capita from $1,000 to a historic high of $30,000 in 1992, due to the appreciation of the yen. Similarly, it took South Korea 40 years and Taiwan 45 years to achieve the same milestone. China's GDP per capita exceeded $1,000 in 2001, and it took 20 years to reach a current GDP per capita of $12,700. While it is true that the purchasing power of the US dollar varies in different eras, the figures mentioned above at least illustrate the need for economies to undergo long-term struggles to develop. Such development cannot be achieved in just a few decades. China's large production capacity makes it impossible for the country to transfer its industries to Southeast Asia or India overnight. The transfer of industries must be a slow and long-term process. Similarly, the decline of an economy does not happen quickly either. The United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany have remained developed economies 70 to 80 years after the Second World War. Japan's economy, on the other hand, has stagnated for 20 to 30 years, and its key industries, such as automobiles and semiconductors, are also facing serious crises. Despite this, Japan has only dropped from the world's second-largest economy to the third, with the GDP per capita still exceeding $30,000. Therefore, narrowing the gap is not an easy task. Even those who are relatively optimistic about China's development prospects only speculate that its GDP per capita will surpass $20,000 by 2030, thereby entering the threshold of developed countries. By that time, the People's Republic of China just have been established for over 80 years, and China's reform and opening up just have exceeded 50 years. Therefore, it is highly unlikely for India and Vietnam to complete what East Asian countries achieved over decades suddenly. It is also impossible for these countries to take away all of China's orders, as claimed by some reports. Such claims are absurd. Economic development is governed by objective laws. However, it is debatable whether developing countries can achieve this on their own, regardless of the difficulties of technological breakthroughs. Even if they import technology directly from developed countries, building a large factory involves a lengthy process, including initial investment negotiations, site selection and planning, construction, product quality improvement, capacity expansion, and cost reduction. This process often takes several years to complete. Additionally, even if this process is completed, it does not guarantee that the factory will be the most competitive one. Who can say that a newly established factory will necessarily be able to compete with existing ones? In the operation of a factory, there are many external factors that determine whether the factory can continue to operate, even if the technology is available and the factory is built. For instance, the development of technology infrastructure plays a significant role in determining the cost of the factory's raw materials and finished products. The education level of the country determines whether the factory can employ enough qualified employees at a reasonable price. Moreover, the competitive advantages brought by the clustering of upstream and downstream industries are all evident weaknesses for countries like India and Vietnam. Since the United States imposed sanctions on the semiconductor industry in 2018, China has invested significantly in its development. Although many companies have experienced several times growth in revenue, China's global market share is still relatively low, and it still has a long way to go to reach the world's top tier. One example of this is SMIC, which was founded in 2000. Despite being in operation for more than 20 years, its revenue is still less than 10% of the world's largest chip manufacturer, TSMC. Therefore, any news claiming that the chip industry orders from Taiwan, South Korea, and the United States have suddenly shifted to China is undoubtedly sensationalized fake news. Based on the export data of the first 2 months of this year, China's exports decreased by 6.8%, Vietnam decreased by 10%, South Korea decreased by 12.1%, and Taiwan had a worse decline, with exports decreasing by 21.2% in January and 17.1% in February. However, there is a significant growth in China's automotive exports, which have become the most notable highlight of its exports in the first 2 months of this year. China's automotive export revenue increased by 65.2%, reaching $14.025 billion. It is worth noting that there is the Spring Festival holiday in all 4 economies, and their short-term data comparability is very high. China's export decline is the smallest among them. Compared to China, India did not celebrate the Spring Festival holiday and experienced a similar 4.6% decrease in exports in January, indicating that the decrease in demand from Europe and the United States is the main reason for the export weakness in East and South Asian economies. It is true that China's low-end industrial chain is migrating to Southeast Asia and India, but the value created by low-end industries is far less than that created by middle and high-end industries. The high-end industries at the top of the industrial chain create most of the value, and the biggest value of low-end industries lies in their ability to provide a large number of jobs. The distribution of value between middle and high-end industries and low-end industries follows the Pareto principle, where middle and high-end industries create 70% to 80% of the value, while low-end industries create 20% to 30% of the value. The global economy is dominated by developed economies, which control middle to high-end industries with high incomes, accounting for over 60% of the total economic output. Despite being a developing country, China also has a number of middle to high-end industries, as do other developing countries, which account for 70% to 80% of the global value created by these industries. Therefore, the key issue for China's economic development is whether industrial upgrading is smooth, as upward development provides a vast space for value. For example, the total economic output of developed economies is over 100 times that of Vietnam. Industrial competition for more industrial share from developed countries generates a much larger pie than competing for low-end industries in developing countries. Industrial upgrading breakthroughs also bring the benefit of having decision-making power to relocate the industry chain in China's hands. For instance, although international brands like Adidas and Nike have moved most of their production capacity to Southeast Asia, China still leads the world in labor-intensive industry production and exports, far surpassing countries like India, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. One of the main reasons for this is the rise of Chinese domestic enterprises such as Antar, Li-Ning, and Beli, all of which manufacture in China. The situation is similar for high-end manufacturing. For instance, Apple holds significant power in deciding which country to place its supply chain, thereby providing employment and exports for that country. If domestic electronic brands can replace more of Apple's market share, the decision-making power will shift more to the country. However, whether it is upward industrial upgrading or the relocation of the low-end industrial chain, it is a slow and gradual process that cannot happen overnight. In the past 2 years, China's export amount has been almost 10 times that of Vietnam, with its export growth being even faster than Vietnam's. In 2022, China's exports increased by 39%, compared with 2020, while Vietnam's increased by 31.5%. Therefore, catching up and chasing is not easy for China and other developing countries. For China, the most crucial work is the upgrading and breakthrough of high-end industries which is the real main battlefield. It not only represents extremely lucrative value, but also means enhanced control over whether the low-end industrial chain will shift.